I was in Africa recently, right? And I noticed a lot of advertisement for churches. But after speaking to numerous people, I realized Africans are not necessarily practicing Christianity. Seems like majority of Africans are still practicing traditional, as you refer to, African sacred sciences. Have you witnessed this during your many trips to Africa?
Well, I've been going back and forth to the continent now for over 40 plus years. And when I first went there, my impression was everybody's Christian over here. There's a church on every corner and mega churches. But then you have to factor in how the church got there. You have to factor in colonialism and how it worked in terms of the socialization process of a population. And when someone comes and take over with a gun, and they're controlling your environment with weapons and tyranny, and then they give you certain pathways to alleviating certain amount of the tyranny. And one of those pathways would be you can go to school, but your name can't be Kwame anymore or Olu anymore. Your name got to be John or James now. If you're willing to give up Olu and Kwame and become John and James, we'll let you into our school and we'll teach you to read English or to read French or to write and to learn mathematics. Thus you can become a civil servant in the colonial substructures and lower corporate structures. And the next level is, if you would abandon the traditional sacred science of your ancestors that forces you to resist my tyranny and accept my methodology of worshiping God, which is our religion, then you will again be rewarded with status in the neo-colonial or colonial structure of the society. And so people then had to turn to church as a sanctuary against the political and military tyranny of the colonizers. But their heart may still be with the shrine in the grove. Or they would have to then turn Jesus into Obatala, but still call it Jesus. You understand? They may have to turn St. Michael into Ogun, but having to call him St. Michael. But we know the African understood clearly that God don't care what name you use, it cares what the intentions of the call and the devotion is. And so you can give me a name, but my intent and my devotion is to the Most High. You may think it's to that image you have me hanging on the wall, but I've gone past that image in terms of what I have declared to be the divine. And so I'm forced to follow your religious protocol, but you can't force me to change my psycho-spiritual understanding of sacred reality. And that's what you're seeing. And you're seeing many of the churches now being abandoned by the younger generation, who makes up something like 70% of African society now, those under 25 and younger. And they're looking to find their pathways back to structurally dealing with African sacred science. How does it look today? What is, since our evolution as a spiritual society was interrupted in terms of its own socio-cultural evolution and institutional designs, now how do we move on that pathway to create new institutional designs for the African sacred science to be expressed through? And what the Europeans have done, going as far back as the ancient Kemet and ancient Nubia, was to steal the African sacred science and call it Western science. Western science is a large aspect of African sacred science.
Can you speak more on that, please?
Yeah. I think I told you before, one of the ones that's easiest to see. In order to plant any crop, in order to raise any animal and mate those animals so they can reproduce, so I can increase my population, so that I can increase the value of my herds. I've got to know when is the appropriate time of year, time of month to do this. I can only know that if I study cosmology, the movements of the stars, the movement of the sun, the movement of the moons, the movement of the planet in relationship to the stars and the suns, the movement of the constellations. We call that astronomy. Astronomy is something our ancestors studied well. But then they realized that the man in the farm and the woman in the farm and the man or woman who are fishermen and the man or woman who are herdsmen and the man or woman who makes the mud brick to make the buildings that people will live in, they don't have time to study the stars. So how do I take this great science that I've studied and they're paying me? The West called me a priest today, but in ancient days I was a scientist. And they paid me to study this so I can tell them, this is the best time to plant this crop, this is the best time to plant this fruit tree, this is the best time to harvest this crop, this is the best time to catch this fish, there's a time when you shouldn't eat that fish, this is the best time to hunt this animal, this is the best time to mate your sheep, and so forth and so on. That is determined by studying those movements in the upper body and see what the animal and plants do normally before I domesticate them when things are in a certain location and a certain orientation. So how do I teach the science now to these people who have to do all this work? I break it down into something called astrology. Astrology becomes the social explanation for the scientific phenomena we call astronomy. And then that is put into ceremonial and ritualistic context in order to teach and retain it within the culture, which is the primary educational system of the people. You know? The same thing with designing a house. Do I design a cube? Do I design a triangle? What does that mean? So I need to develop a methodology for looking at that. That I need to decide how much land that we will have to use for planting this crop or that crop. How much land does this family get versus this family get because of the number of people in this family and the number of people in this family. So I develop a science of measurements called geometry. But that's not what the farmer don't have time to do that. This is what we, the scientists who you call the priesthood, do for the society. The society takes care of us. We take care of this for them. All of this compilation becomes the sacred science of a people. The understanding of cosmology and ecology, the relationship between cosmology, the human being, and the ecology. That's African sacred science. And that's why I said the European extract aspect of it, our mathematics, trigonometry, our geometry, our physics, and even aspects of our medicine, and call it science, Western science. Yet the earliest books written on any of these topics is found in ancient Africa. Even the Greeks acknowledge it. Herodotus in Book 2 is all about Africa. Plato in his book Phaedrus, he says Africa gave the world all of its sciences. And he names it arithmetic, geometry, chemistry. He says medicine. This is Plato, right? And he said, but the greatest science of all that he called us Ethiopian back then, that the Ethiopians give to the world. This is Plato and Phaedra, or Phaedrus, that's the name of the book. He said the greatest science of all is writing itself. So you can't say Plato is wrong, he the man, right? So when you begin to understand this and you read Herodotus, or you go to Homer, Homer wrote the Odyssey and the Iliad. And this is considered to be the first book. Yet in the Odyssey and the Iliad, Homer said all of the gods of Greece must return to Ethiopia every season to renew themselves. Now Homer can't be wrong. You said Homer wrote the first book. You said Herodotus is the father of history. You said Plato, second only to a mixed race African Greek person you call Socrates, was the greatest philosophy ever. So they told the truth. Only when I repeat what they say, you say it's not the truth. But when they're telling the truth and they're writing, you say, oh, how great they are. So let's rely on history and those who lived those history and those who studied with the Africans and learned the science, the sacred science, which the West now call its science. Do you hear me? My people, listen to me well. I'm telling you something. What the West call Western science is a great aspect of African sacred science that they stole, copied, and plagiarized when they started invading our lands, going back to the early 3000s, 2000 BCs.